Welcome. Today's presentation, we'll be talking about forensic investigation from crime scene to courtroom. First, a little bit about the Mad.Forensic.Scientist. Forensic and clinical laboratory roles, including experiencing toxicology and chemistry casework. I'm also Assistant Chief Forensic Toxicologist. I have leadership positions serving as CLIA Lab Director and have acted as a clinical consultant. I have a PhD in forensic science from West Virginia University, developed drugs detection methods for complex samples, as well as investigated emerging drugs of abuse. I like to focus in on teaching and mentorship. That's why I have this channel. So, evidence. Why is evidence important in forensic investigations? Evidence establishes the links. It's going to connect suspects to victims and crime scenes, corroborates or refutes testimonies, and establishes timelines or sequences of events. But just as important, evidence needs to have admissibility. So it must be relevant, reliable, and legally obtained. If you obtain evidence in an illegal manner, it doesn't matter how important, how relevant it is. If it is not going to be admissible into the court, then it is not useful. It must be reliable. We have a saying, garbage in, garbage out. If you do not collect this evidence properly, if it is damaged or contaminated, then you are not going to get a good result. So, establishing a link in a relevant, reliable, and legally attained manner is the focus of evidence in forensic investigations. Let's talk a little bit about crime scene management. It's important to effectively manage to preserve your evidence and support successful investigations. Proper methods are going to align with the scene type and size. You have a walkthrough. So the purpose of the walkthrough is to help document the scene, to identify transient evidence such as boundaries, and prioritize collection. So you want to make sure that your scene is secure. You might have some transient evidence, you might have evidence that either blow away, the conditions may not be favorable. You also don't want to make sure that your scene is protected from traffic, foot traffic, things like that. And then, of course, search methods. There are different types of techniques that are used, including zone, grid, spiral, strip line, based all on the size, scene size, and the layout of the scene. It's important to determine the appropriate investigation methods. Methods must align with the scene type. So if you have a small indoor area or a large outdoor field, that's going to change the way you investigate. Also, so if you have an example of a burglary, you're going to focus in on the entry and exit points. If you have a homicide, you're going to focus in on the victim, bloodstain patterns, weapons, etc. So the scene is going to determine your methods and how you develop everything. That's why it's important to do that first walkthrough of the crime scene to mentally document the scene, as well as taking initial notes. This gives you an idea of what your search methods and what you're going to apply later on. You can also identify transient evidence that's going to be lost or destroyed. So you're going to focus in on those, and you can determine boundaries of the scene and prioritize evidence collection. So you can determine what evidence is going to be most valuable or most risky to lose. And it's also it's important to choose evidence that might you want to work on your way less invasive and work your way to more invasive. You want to identify points of entry and exit. These are going to be places where suspect most likely had to touch something to enter, so they had to do something to enter the place. So it's important to document and to identify where potential points of entry are, as well as if it's obvious points of entry. So some crime scene search methods include zone. This is good for indoor scenes, dividing larger scenes into manageable quadrants. Then you have grid. This is a thorough double-check method. We're good for large outdoor scenes. And you have a spiral. It's when there's no physical barriers, off single investigators working inward, or you can work outward, so you kind of spiral out. It's good for when you only have one person, only one thing. I like to kind of spiral when I do my walkthrough if it's an open area. And then line search. This is effective for large workroom scenes or large rooms. When you have multiple investigators, they can move in a line. You kind of stand up, distance apart, Showing this evidence that way. Physical evidence. This is what you're going to be collecting as a forensic investigator. They have categories of different types of evidence. Biological, which often is blood, semen, hair, saliva, or skin cells. These are going to contain DNA or serological samples. Then you have trace, which includes fibers, paint chips, glass, soil, fire debris, things of that nature. Then you have pattern. These are going to be your impressions. Tire impressions, shoe impressions, tool marks, bloodstain patterns. These are going to be forming patterns to identify usually class characteristics, but there can be individuation. Then you have your firearms tool marks. That's going to be your ballistics, your shell casings, striations, and then drugs and paraphernalia, your powders, your bags, pipes, etc. The evidence collection depends on the type of physical evidence. The evidence must be collected in a way to prevent degradation and contamination. This includes air drying of wet or biological evidence. Low cards exchange method. So Edmund Locard, he's considered the father of the modern firearm. Core concept is that when two objects come into contact, an exchange of material occurs. This exchange creates a transfer and a cross transfer. So every contact leaves a trace. This is the core idea behind linking evidence. So you'll try to link a perpetrator to a victim or a perpetrator to a crime scene. Some instances you're trying to link the victim to a crime scene. The victim is moved until you find a body dumped. You're trying to link that victim to the crime scene, to the actual initial crime scene. So that happens. That's a possibility. The big linkage is going to always be the suspect to the victim and the suspect to the crime scene. So the presence of victim's trace evidence on the victim or vice versa helps establish the present association. So in theory, when a perpetrator is perpetrating their act against the victim, there's going to be contact, and therefore there can be transfer of evidence. So something can be left behind, whether it's skin under fingernails, whether it's hair potentially of the victim being on the perpetrator. Blood is a very big one. Victim's blood. It's hard if you create a mess, if you stab somebody or shoot somebody, it's hard to avoid all traces of blood. Gunshots, gunshot residue. A lot of things that transfer from a victim to a suspect. Those are all things that targeted in on. And of course, once you, if you're at a scene and you have evidence, you focus on collecting, packaging, and establishing your chain of custody. Items of evidence packaging procedures include dry, biological, so you need to put in breathable containers, flavor bags, envelopes to prevent mold and degradation. It's important to not let the articles breathe, so you have to do that to prevent degradation. What do you see here in this picture? Yeah, there's some plastic bags. That is actually not how you put and maintain biological evidence. You should never use plastic. It doesn't allow it to breathe, and that can cause mold or bacterial degradation of the DNA. Firearms and sharp objects, they should be secured in a rigid container, large cardboard boxes to prevent injury or damage. These are often zip tied in. The firearm should be cleared, should be secured. And then, of course, arson and debris. These are typically stored in airtight metal vans to preserve volatile residue. It's important when there's arson that to try to prevent any of the volatiles, because the analysis of arson is going to particularly for solvents, specifically for things that you burn off, gasoline, ethanol, things of that nature. So you want to make sure that you are not allowing the volatile residues to leak. Critical role in chain of custody. This is going to be your chronological paper trail documenting every person who has possessed the evidence. It's important to have your chain of custody, because this ensures the evidence's integrity, authenticity, and human standard. And this is essential for the admissibility in court. Chain of custody is vital. You have to maintain the chain of custody. This means packaging through evidence tape, signing your initials across the evidence tape, so that way if the item is tampered with, if the evidence tape is broken, then it means somebody opened it inappropriately. Now, this is important. So you have evidence here, I just on this bag, that whenever the evidence is accessed, the next person is not going to break your seal. They're going to access the bag, cardboard box, or whatever through another side. So like they're going to cut open a side, and then when they return the evidence, they're going to reseal that with another piece of tape, and they're going to have their initial sign on, stuff like that. So it's important that you understand that when you're choosing your items, that someone's going to be analyzing and they need to access it without damaging the evidence container. That's why typically we have a primary container and a secondary container. And it's going to be, primary container is going to be where the evidence is going to be contained, it's going to be sealed, and you're making sure that you are getting in there properly. So it's important to document and maintain the chain. You don't want to break the chain. Breaking the chain can make it an admissible to court, and then therefore, it doesn't matter how useful or how valuable the evidence is, if it's not admissible, it's useless. And then, of course, documenting the crime scene. There are a couple of techniques. Important things include notes, detailed and permanent action of observations and conditions. It's time, so you should timestamp it. It should be detailed. In photography, you should be taking your overall, your mid-range, and your close-up views. It's important when you're taking these photos to include scales and labels. You need your label markers. You need scales for your up-close images. You should always have a scale, because if you don't have a scale in there, you don't actually know how large an image is or how large an object is or things like that. You need your scale. It's always good when you're taking your overall pictures to have some kind of identifying markers for the street signs, house numbers, things like that. So you want to document some kind of physical thing that you can see. This is going to help locate your scene later, or place your items. The whole purpose of photography is to be able to place items back in the scene and to establish linkages. So if you do not have your overall, your mid-range, and your close-up, you don't already have the totality of the scene. You want to make sure you have the scene you can place items in. To be honest, sometimes you may not observe everything, and sometimes going back into a photo or you identify something later on, and oh, this piece of evidence was important. It's like, where was it at? It's like, why was it important? And then you can go back to your images and see what was that scene, and that can make a difference. It's important to have your photographs. And then, of course, just as important, your sketches. So you have your rough sketch, which is going to be your measurement and spatial relationships, and then your finished and final sketch is going to be clean to scale. The rough sketch can be rough. It's hand driven. It's not necessarily graded out, and it's going to be there for you to know how to build up the final sketch. It is important though. Keep in mind the rough sketch is evidence. Everything you write is evidence. So it is something that needs to be reasonable, but it's for you. It's for notes. It's what you're going to be using to build your final sketch later on. So it is important to try to put everything you can in there, and you have your measurements, that's where you have your wall, your dimensions, triangulations, all that good stuff. That's where you're gonna have all that. So don't have your notepad, sketch it out. I like grids, I like gridded paper. So I like to take my rough sketch, and place everything in the way it should be. And then of course, wrapping it up to finish the scale. There's CAD, AutoCAD, so Canva, there's all kinds of this other, you can just power. There's all kinds of tools we use. There's professional tools. Another thing is the pharaohs. They've done things that they're doing like photography, because they'll build a scene, they'll put a pharaoh in there and do 3D imaging of the scene. Patterns. Change if you can tag your photos in there, tag sketches. It's really cool. Another thing now is that in drone, like a lot of times large farm seeing organizations have drones, so they'll fly drones over large areas and use that. Yeah, so that's a thing that's kind of emerging too. it's for scene documentation. With that, we'll wrap up. Any questions, you can post them in the comments. I will try to answer them. I really appreciate you guys watching. But I'm hoping that we get some good feedback here. So if you enjoyed that, be sure to hit that subscribe button, that like button, share it to your friends, and comment what it is you like about pharmacy and what you gain from this presentation. What if you have the time, let me know what it is you'd like to see next. I appreciate you guys watching. Hit that subscribe button and share it.